A top member of Congress plans to visit Taiwan. Bill Gates is funding Chinese science. And China is spying on the Federal Reserve. That and more on this week's China News headlines. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Matt Gnezda. This episode is sponsored by Surfshark. You should be using a VPN like Surfshark to protect yourself whenever you go online. So, U.S. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi. She's always been controversial. But one thing's for sure, she's also always taken a stand on China. Like in the 90s when she was a champion of the Free Tibet movement. You know, when standing up to the Chinese Communist Party used to be cool. Well, like spaghetti straps and bucket hats, standing up to the CCP has become cool once again. No. Anyway, this time Pelosi is standing up to the Chinese Communist Party by planning a visit to Taiwan. There's been no official confirmation of the trip yet, but it's been widely reported. The last U.S. Speaker of the House to visit Taiwan was Newt Gingrich back in the 90s. You know, when it was cool the first time. The predictable outcome of the reports of Pelosi's trip, of course, is that it angers China. Which, might I remind the mainstream media, is not Pelosi's fault. If supporting a Democratic ally in the face of a genocidal bully makes that genocidal bully angry, the problem doesn't lie in supporting your ally. It lies with the bully being a jerkface. And anyway, what's China going to do? Invade Taiwan? They're already planning to invade Taiwan. But President Biden doesn't seem to understand this. In a response to a reporter's question about Pelosi's potential visit, Biden said this.
Well, I think that the military thinks it's not a good idea right now.
Now, officially, the White House says it has not taken a position on Pelosi's Taiwan visit. Unofficially, there are reports coming out about the Biden administration trying to convince Nancy Pelosi of the risks of her trip. It's not clear from these anonymous reports whether this is actually about making sure Pelosi understands the risks, or if it's about pressuring her to not go to Taiwan. Meanwhile, Newt Gingrich has some advice for Pelosi. Tell risk-averse Biden officials to shut up and go to Taiwan anyway. I never thought I'd say this, but I'm with Newt Gingrich on this one. The Chinese Communist Party is not going to start World War III over Nancy Pelosi visiting Taiwan. They just want to scare the U.S. into thinking they will. And unfortunately, it's looking like the Biden administration scares easily. President Biden had a phone call with Xi Jinping on Thursday. The call lasted for more than 2 hours. As of when I recorded this video, we don't know exactly what they talked about. I wonder if Xi Jinping told Biden it would be a big mistake to let Pelosi visit Taiwan. Fortunately, President Biden is very good at making mistakes. Hit him with strategic confusion, Mr. President. But it's not all tension between Joe Biden and Xi Jinping. Last week, when we didn't record a headlines episode, Xi had apparently sent Biden a message wishing him a speedy recovery from COVID. That's so sweet. How about also writing Biden an apology for China's initial 6-week cover-up that let COVID spread around the world? And after the break, Bill Gates is funding the Chinese regime's science projects. Welcome back. There's no nice way to say this. Bill Gates' foundation just paid for the Chinese Communist Party to recruit foreign scientists. Basically, the Gates Foundation is funding the Foreign Talent Research Center of China's Ministry of Science and Technology to the tune of $100,000. In theory, the money is to help organize a forum on pandemic preparedness and response. Makes sense. Like I said earlier, the Chinese regime is responsible for that massive 6-week cover-up that allowed the pandemic to spread globally. So obviously, if you give them more money, surely they'll do better next time. The Gates Foundation money, though, is being given to the Foreign Talent Research Center. That's a Communist Party affiliated group whose job is to recruit top scientists from the West and bring them to China, where they get paid boatloads of money to do cutting-edge research designed to help China's private sector and military outcompete the West. Bill Gates may be smart, but he's extremely stupid. And that's me being nice about it. But maybe the Chinese Communist Party just wants to be America's friend, which is why they tried to plant spies inside the US Federal Reserve, and also detained a Fed employee in a hotel room in China and threatened his family to get secret US economic data. These allegations are in a report from Republican Senator Rob Portman on the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee. The report says that Chinese operatives have employed both bribery and coercion to garner influence with employees of the Federal Reserve System in attempts to get them to provide sensitive information about the U.S. economy to the Chinese Communist Party. That sounds pretty scary. The Chinese Communist Party has infiltrated the most important banking institution in the U.S., the very institution that is printing America's money. The good news is, as the Fed has clearly demonstrated over the past 2 years, they literally can't even predict when inflation is going to happen, even when that inflation is caused by their own money printing. In other words, America's best natural defense against China's infiltration of the banking system is human incompetence. But you know what will fix America's inflation problem? Selling oil to China. As part of the Biden administration's efforts to combat high gas prices, he's ordered the release of a record amount of U.S. strategic petroleum reserves. And over the last few months, millions of barrels from the reserves have been sold overseas. And nearly 1 million barrels of it have now been sold to China, specifically to Unipec, the trading arm of Sinopec, which is owned directly by the Chinese government. Which sounds pretty scary until you realize, yeah, it is legitimately scary. The problem isn't with selling U.S. oil reserves. That pretty much has to happen because the U.S. oil refineries aren't set up to refine the kind of crude oil the U.S. produces. So the U.S. government releases the oil and sells it to other countries to try to lower overall oil prices, which theoretically would lower gas prices here in the U.S. The problem is the U.S. is selling some of that oil to China, a regime that kills ethnic minorities for breakfast. And it gets even worse because this is not a one-time oopsie. In 2017, President Trump's administration had sold 500,000 barrels from the U.S. strategic reserves to a different Chinese oil producer, PetroChina. So while everyone is quick to blame whichever president they hate most, the real problem is that the U.S. Department of Energy is actually required to sell those strategic petroleum reserves to the highest bidder, even if that highest bidder is linked to a regime that's threatening to start World War III. Although, to be fair, America does so much business with China that even 1 million barrels of oil is a drop in the bucket to how much money it pumps into the Chinese regime. That does not make me feel better. And finally this week, an Australian human rights activist was arrested in the UK after protesting the genocide of the Uyghurs. Drew Pavlou was detained for allegedly emailing a bomb threat to the Chinese embassy in London. Police held him for 23 hours and initially denied him access to a phone call or a lawyer. Pavlou said he never sent any bomb threat, calling it an orchestrated campaign against him by the Chinese Communist Party. Should we believe that a cheeky human rights activist with no history of violence suddenly threatened to murder a bunch of people? Or that a regime that justifies genocide of ethnic minorities by claiming they're terrorists would lie to make a peaceful activist look like a terrorist? It's hard to say. This is what the bomb threat allegedly emailed to the Chinese embassy said. "This is Drew Pavlou. You have until 12 p.m. to stop the Uyghur genocide, or I blow up the embassy with a bomb. Regards, Drew." Regards, Drew? Now I know he didn't send the bomb threat. It's way too polite. The first time we had Drew on our podcast, he used more swear words than all our previous guests combined. We actually had to pause partway through and ask him to please stop swearing so we could keep our clean rating on iTunes. And then we still had to bleep things out. Drew Pavlou is not the kind of guy who would politely threaten anything. He's the kind of guy who would pull some outrageous publicity stunt, like, I don't know, hold up a sign that says Xi Jinping F's your mother, or like glue himself to the Chinese embassy to get media attention. A spokesperson for London's Metropolitan Police said he was found to be in possession of a quantity of glue and had attempted to glue his hand to the outside of the embassy building. Yep, that sounds like Drew. Drew has now been released without actually being charged with anything, although he has been told he's not allowed to leave the UK, which just goes to show the UK clearly does not actually think Drew Pavlou is a criminal. If they did, they'd send him right back to Australia, where criminals belong. And this episode is sponsored by Surfshark. Whenever you go online, everything you do is being tracked by the websites you visit, and then they sell records of your activities and habits to advertisers. And I definitely don't need 100 marketing companies knowing I just binge-watched both seasons of Emily in Paris on Netflix. I don't want to buy another bucket hat, okay? But it's not just advertisers that want your data. It's also governments, especially if you're living under a censorship-happy regime like the Chinese Communist Party. They're always watching. And that's why you should be keeping your internet activity private all the time with a VPN like Surfshark. It doesn't matter what you're doing online. It's not the business of advertisers or the government. Surfshark keeps your online data private with uncrackable encryption. Plus, Surfshark has a feature that will tell you when you go to a website if it's been breached or is part of a data leak. Basically, it's another way to keep you safe from malicious actors. Actors that might, I don't know, try to send a fake email with your name on it. So if you don't have Surfshark yet, check it out. And with just one Surfshark account, you can actually use it on all your devices, your phone, your laptop, and your tablet. So check it out now. Surfshark has a special deal for China Uncensored fans that includes 83% off a 2-year plan plus 3 extra months for free. That makes it just $221 a month. So go to surfshark.com/uncensored and use the code uncensored to get this deal. The link is in the description below. Once again, I'm Matt Gnezda. Thanks for watching China Uncensored.